He shuffled through the towering glass doors of Metropolitan First Bank, his worn leather shoes squeaking against the polished marble floor. The old man's dark wool cap sat crooked on his silver hair, and his faded blue shirt peeked out from beneath a brown coat that had seen better decades. In his weathered hands, he clutched a manila folder containing documents that would have shocked everyone in that pristine lobby. "Excuse me, miss," he said softly to the receptionist behind the mahogany counter. "I'd like to discuss establishing a large educational fund." She barely glanced up from her computer screen, her manicured fingers continuing to type. "Sir, the community banking services are located in the strip mall across town. This is our private wealth management division." Her voice carried the practiced dismissal of someone accustomed to redirecting people she deemed unworthy. Manager Derek Paulson emerged from his glass office, his Italian suit and gold watch gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. He surveyed the scene with cold calculation, his eyes narrowing as they took in the old man's modest appearance. "Is there some kind of problem here, Janet?" Derek asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "This gentleman seems to have wandered into the wrong building." Other customers in expensive clothing turned to stare, their conversations halting as they witnessed what was clearly about to become an uncomfortable scene. Derek stepped closer, his cologne overwhelming the old man's senses. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave, sir. This establishment serves a very specific clientele, and I don't believe you meet our requirements." The elderly man's face flushed crimson as whispers began circulating among the onlookers. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched his folder tighter. What none of them knew was that tomorrow morning, their CEO would discover exactly who Harold Mitchell was. And when that revelation came to light, it would send shockwaves through every floor of that marble monument to wealth and status. Harold Mitchell's story began 47 years ago when he was just a young bookkeeper earning $38 a week at Morrison's hardware store. Every evening after work, he would drive his beat-up Volkswagen to the poorest neighborhoods in the city, carrying cardboard boxes filled with handwritten financial education materials he had prepared during his lunch breaks. What started as helping 5 struggling families balance their checkbooks had quietly evolved into something extraordinary. Harold founded the Mitchell Foundation for Financial Literacy using his modest savings and his late wife's teaching pension, never imagining it would eventually transform over 18,000 lives across 4 decades. He personally visited families facing foreclosure, spent nights teaching budgeting classes in church basements, and even mortgaged his own small house twice to keep the foundation operating during economic downturns. Harold never advertised his work or sought recognition. There were no press releases, no social media campaigns, no fundraising galas. He simply showed up week after week, year after year, armed with patience, wisdom, and an unwavering belief that financial education could break generational cycles of poverty. His most treasured success story was the Washington family, whom he had met 16 years ago when they were living in their car with 3 young children. Harold spent 18 months working with them personally, teaching them budgeting, helping them secure stable housing, and showing them how to build credit from nothing. Today, James Washington owns a small construction company. His wife, Sharon, runs a successful catering business, and all 3 of their children have graduated from college debt-free. But Harold's impact extended far beyond individual families. The financial literacy curriculum he developed had been quietly adopted by 17 school districts, though few knew its origin. His foundation had also provided emergency financial assistance to over 300 families during natural disasters, always anonymously, always without fanfare. Harold believed that true service happened in silence, away from cameras and accolades. His greatest reward was watching people he had helped become financially independent, knowing they would pass that knowledge on to their own children and communities. The world around Harold Mitchell saw only what it wanted to see: an elderly man in outdated clothes who probably needed charity himself. At the grocery store, cashiers would count his coupons with barely concealed irritation, assuming he was pinching pennies out of desperation rather than habit. At restaurants, servers would automatically bring him senior discount menus and speak louder, presuming age meant incapacity. Even at his longtime bank, Newer employees would direct him to basic checking account brochures when he asked simple questions, never realizing he was one of their most significant clients. But recently, strange things had begun happening that suggested Harold's invisible impact was becoming visible to those who mattered. 3 months ago, while Harold was organizing donated school supplies at Lincoln Elementary, he overheard 2 teachers discussing the miracle transformation of their financial literacy program. They were praising the anonymous curriculum donor who had revolutionized how their students learned about money management, never realizing the quiet janitor organizing supplies in the corner was their mysterious benefactor. Last month, Harold received an unexpected letter at his modest apartment. It was from Dr. Sarah Chen, now a successful pediatric surgeon, thanking the unknown teacher who had saved her family from bankruptcy 20 years earlier. Sarah had been 8 years old when Harold taught her parents budgeting skills that kept them from losing their home. She had searched for years to find him, wanting to express her gratitude for making her education possible. The letter included a $5,000 donation to the Mitchell Foundation, with a note saying she had established a scholarship fund in honor of the teacher who never gave his name. Harold kept that letter in his wallet, reading it whenever. Doubt crept in about whether his quiet work truly mattered. Even more remarkable was what happened at St. Michael's Community Center, where Harold had taught classes for over a decade. The center director, Mrs. Rodriguez, had noticed that every family who completed Harold's program seemed to experience dramatic improvements in their financial situations. She began tracking their progress and discovered that 93% of Harold's students had increased their credit scores by at least 200 points within 2 years. Many had purchased their first homes, started small businesses, or sent children to college. Mrs. Rodriguez had no idea that the humble man she knew as Harold the volunteer was actually the foundation's founder and primary funding source. The moment of revelation arrived when Metropolitan First Bank CEO James Crawford was walking to his lunch meeting and spotted a familiar figure moving slowly down the sidewalk, shoulders slumped with visible dejection. Crawford's recognition was immediate and profound. That gentle face belonged to Harold Mitchell, the man whose foundation had literally saved the bank's existence during the 2008 financial crisis. But the connection was even more personal than most people knew. Crawford's own son, Michael, had been spiraling into gambling addiction and crushing debt 5 years earlier. In desperation, Crawford had sought help from various counselors and financial advisors, but nothing worked until someone mentioned free classes at the community center taught by a man who worked miracles with hopeless cases. Harold Mitchell had spent 6 months patiently working with Michael, teaching him not just budgeting skills, but helping him understand the psychological triggers behind his destructive spending habits. Michael was now 2 years clean from gambling, owned his own small business, and had recently gotten engaged to a wonderful woman who knew nothing of his past struggles. But Crawford knew something else that made this moment even more significant. 15 years ago, when Metropolitan First Bank was hemorrhaging money and facing federal seizure, an anonymous foundation had provided a crucial $12 million bridge loan that allowed them to restructure and survive. The loan came through something called the Mitchell Foundation for Financial Literacy, but strict confidentiality agreements had kept the donor's identity sealed. Crawford had always wondered about their mysterious savior, occasionally asking his legal team if there was any way to identify and thank the person who had saved over 400 jobs and countless customer accounts. Now watching Harold Mitchell walk away from his bank in humiliation, the pieces aligned with devastating clarity. The man his employees had just ejected wasn't just any elderly customer. He was the quiet hero who had personally prevented the bank's collapse and, in doing so, had preserved the financial stability of thousands of community members. Crawford ran down the marble steps, his handmade shoes clicking frantically against the stone as he called out, "Mr. Mitchell! Harold Mitchell, please wait!" The elderly man turned slowly, surprised to hear his name spoken with such urgency by a stranger in an expensive suit. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, you're about to witness a moment that will restore your faith in recognition and justice. Hit that subscribe button because what happens next proves that Truth always finds a way to surface no matter how deeply it's buried. Crawford approached with genuine reverence, slightly breathless from his sprint. "Sir, I am James Crawford, CEO of Metropolitan First Bank, and I cannot adequately express how sorry I am for what just occurred in my building. I know exactly who you are and what you've done, and the thought that my employees treated you with such disrespect makes me physically ill." Harold's weathered face showed confusion mixed with concern, unsure how this well-dressed executive knew his identity. Crawford continued, his voice thick with emotion. "5 years ago, you saved my son Michael from a gambling addiction that was destroying our entire family. You spent months working with him, never charging a penny, never asking for recognition. But that's not even the most remarkable thing you've done for us." Crawford paused, gathering himself before delivering the revelation that would change everything. 15 years ago, when our bank was facing federal closure and thousands of people were about to lose their savings, your foundation provided an emergency loan that literally saved this institution. We've been searching for ways to thank our anonymous benefactor for over a decade, never realizing that the man we owed everything to was being treated like an unwanted visitor in our own lobby. Harold's eyes widened as memories of that old financial emergency came flooding back. He had forgotten about that particular loan. It was just another quiet act of service when he learned that families in his community might lose their life savings if the local bank failed. Crawford's voice grew stronger. "Every job in that building, every mortgage we've approved, every small business loan that helped someone achieve their dreams, all of it exists because of your generosity and wisdom. And my son's recovery, his new business, his engagement to a wonderful woman, none of that would have happened without your patience and guidance. Justice arrived not through revenge or humiliation, but through education and transformation." Crawford personally escorted Harold back into the bank, where a very different scene unfolded before the gathered staff and customers. Derek Paulson's face drained of color as his boss explained Harold's true identity and significance to their institution. The receptionist, Janet, stood frozen as she realized she had dismissed the man whose foundation had unknowingly funded her daughter's scholarship to nursing school through a program she had never connected to the Mitchell Foundation. Crawford addressed the assembled group with measured authority. "This gentleman, Harold Mitchell, is not just a valued customer. He is the reason this bank exists today. His foundation saved us from closure 15 years ago, and his educational programs have helped thousands of families in our community achieve financial stability. The fact that he was treated with disrespect in our lobby is a failure of our values and training that I take full responsibility for." Rather than publicly humiliate his employees, Crawford used the moment as a transformative teaching opportunity. He announced that Metropolitan First Bank would immediately partner with the Mitchell Foundation to offer free financial literacy classes in their community rooms, and that sensitivity training would become mandatory for all staff members. Harold, true to his generous character, requested that no one be terminated over the incident. Instead, he suggested that Derek and Janet might benefit from volunteering with the Foundation's programs to better understand the diverse backgrounds of the people they served. Derek Paulson, standing red-faced before his colleagues and customers, struggled to comprehend how dramatically he had misjudged the situation. Harold approached him with the same gentle demeanor he had shown earlier, extending his weathered hand in forgiveness. "Son, I don't need an apology from you, but I hope this experience will help you remember that every person who walks through those doors has a story you don't know. Wealth isn't always visible, and poverty isn't always what it seems. Treat everyone with dignity, not because of what they might be worth financially, but because of what they are, human beings deserving of basic respect." The afternoon's events transformed from potential confrontation into profound community education. Crawford announced that the bank would establish the Harold Mitchell Community Impact Award, recognizing local individuals who made significant but unrecognized contributions to their neighborhoods. Local news crews began arriving as word spread about the remarkable revelation, but Harold politely declined interviews, preferring to let the Foundation's work speak for itself. Derek Paulson, deeply shaken by his error in judgment, approached Harold privately to request information about volunteering with the literacy programs. Janet, the receptionist, tearfully shared how the Foundation's scholarship program had enabled her daughter to become the first college graduate in their family's history. The incident became a catalyst for broader changes throughout the bank's operations, with new policies ensuring that every customer would be treated with equal respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived economic status. Sometimes the most profound lessons arrive disguised as ordinary moments, wrapped in the most humble packages. Harold Mitchell walked home that evening to his small apartment, where he sat at his kitchen table and wrote in the journal he had kept for 30 years. "Today I learned that recognition isn't always necessary, but it can be a powerful teacher for others," he wrote in his careful handwriting. The young man at the bank didn't mean to be cruel. He simply hadn't learned to see past surface appearances. Perhaps this experience will help him and others remember that greatness rarely announces itself with fanfare. It usually arrives quietly, dressed in ordinary clothes, carrying extraordinary purpose. The real victory of that day wasn't Harold's vindication, but the possibility that Derek, Janet, and everyone who witnessed those events might pause before judging the next person who doesn't meet their superficial expectations. We live in a society obsessed with image, where designer labels and expensive accessories often determine how we're treated by strangers. But what if the person you overlook today is the one who has already changed your life in ways you'll never know? What if the individual you dismiss based on their appearance is actually the quiet hero your community has been celebrating without knowing their name? Harold Mitchell's story challenges us to examine our own biases and assumptions. How many times have we made snap judgments about people based on their clothing, their age, their accent, or their apparent economic status? How many opportunities for meaningful connection have we missed because we couldn't see past surface appearances, to recognize the human dignity that exists in everyone? The next time you encounter someone who doesn't fit your expectations, remember that you might be standing in the presence of someone whose invisible acts of kindness and generosity have already touched your world in profound ways. True wealth isn't always measured in dollars. Sometimes it's measured in the lives you've quietly transformed, the hope you've restored, and the dignity with which you treat every person you meet, regardless of how the world has taught you to see them.